My name is Rabbi Efrat Zarin Zohar. I'm the Executive Director of SAGE, and I'm excited to be moderating this virtual conversation. I'd like, whenever I say your name, to please wave and say hello. We are blessed to have with us tonight Trish Adlesic, the director, producer, and co-writer. Wave and say hello. Yes. And Susan Margolin, producer.
Hello.
From the movie Tree of Life, about the shooting in Pittsburgh on October 27th, 3 years ago. The film is premiering at this year's festival. And in addition, we're joined by special guests, Eric Schuman, co-writer, co-producer, editor, and a former member of the Tree of Life synagogue.
Hi.
Audrey Glickman, a survivor of the shooting and the shofar blower in the film.
Hi.
Brad Orsini, the former director of security director for the Pittsburgh Federation, now with Secure Community Network, who was interviewed in the film.
How are you, everybody?
Wasi Mohamed, the former director of the Islamic Center of Pittsburgh, who was interviewed in the film. Wasi, can you say
everybody?
Hi? As well as two people from Miami who have deep Pittsburgh ties. Rabbi Jonathan Berkun, currently senior rabbi of the Aventura Turnberry Jewish Center, who grew up at Tree of Life Synagogue before his father, Rabbi Alvin Berkun, retired and became emeritus there. He flew into Pittsburgh immediately after the shooting to support his mother and father, who had almost gone to synagogue that morning. And Josh Sayles, the Jewish Community Relations Director of Pittsburgh's Federation at the time, and now lucky for us, in the same role here in Miami.
Hi.
So thank you all for joining us. So I'd like to start by asking Trish, Susan, and Eric to tell us about their motivation for making the film and the reason they took the angles that they took. So let's start with Trish.
Thank you very much for that phenomenal introduction. And I want to thank everybody for being here today, to our panelists, because it's so meaningful to have this important conversation. I grew up in Pittsburgh. I was there the day of the attack. I had my father in the Catskills with me in the summer months, and we had driven back to Pittsburgh for his birthday, which was October 25th. And the morning of the attack, all of our phones were ringing endlessly in horror. We had no idea what was going on. We knew there was a catastrophe happening at Tree of Life. We weren't sure if there were more shooters or it was overwhelming and stunningly shocking and terrifying and heart-wrenching, because having grown up in a community of love and integration and collectivity of each other and supporting your neighbors, you know, Mr. Rogers being such an icon in Pittsburgh, it was unfathomable that something like this would happen. I know people always say, it would never happen here, but we truly felt that way. It was so heart-wrenching on so many levels. And I was there, and I just finished my former film, I Am Evidence, a few months prior, and I wanted to do something. I wanted to respond. And I thought the only way to do that would be to let those that experience what happened tell the story. And I immediately started filming the next day. And I received a grant from a dear friend whose parents survived Auschwitz and lost a sister on 9/11. And we all felt very strongly that we needed to document what happened. And those that lived it should tell it. And fortunately, I had a connection to Audrey, who's here, and so grateful for her shofar playing, sounding the alarm, and her interest and support in opening doors to relationships to everybody involved. I mean, frankly, she should be a producer as well. That's how it all started. And, it's been a deeply meaningful and crucially important journey.
Thank you. And Susan.
Well, Trish called me and asked me to come on board as a producer of the film. And I had worked with her on her previous Gasland films, and I was a great admirer of her work on those, as well as I Am Evidence. And I have a background in producing films about dealing with white supremacy and extremism, civil rights, and a film actually directed by a Miami native called Paper Children, about children who are refugees. So, it felt really important to get involved in this film, and I saw what Trish had shot, and just was completely blown away by the subjects of the film, and the way that they gave of themselves in telling the story, and their willingness to relive, their willingness to retell the story for the benefit of generations to come. And I'm so honored to be a part of this.
Thank you. Eric.
Yeah, so when Trish reached out to me about coming aboard the film, I immediately agreed to, because my family used to attend Tree of Life when I was younger. My brother was bar mitzvahed there. They end up leaving, so that's why we're former congregants leaving Pittsburgh. But so it was a story that I felt was necessary to tell, as not only a former Tree of Life congregant, but not only as a Jew, but also because my grandmother was in the Holocaust, and so the rise of extremism and anti-Semitism is something that is, it's an important issue to me, and I felt a duty as a filmmaker and a Jew, an American Jew, to tell, or to help tell. And I felt like Trish's approach was really strong to highlight not thinkers or people who think about extremism or have theoretical ideas about these kind of complex topics, but instead the people that were there, what happened to them, and how they are still dealing with it today. And so the process of us working through the film was asking, how can we best help them tell their stories, and not just try to impose our own narrative or our own story onto them. And hopefully, we were able to do that. I've been very happy with the responses we've gotten so far from the congregants who were present there, and the relatives of the ones who unfortunately passed.
Thank you. So I'd like to turn to the other members of the panel and ask you each to share your own reactions to watching the film, and thereby to some extent revisiting the event. And I'll start with Audrey, and then go to Brad, and then Wasi, and Rabbi Berkun, and Josh. So Audrey, please start.
Well, first let me say that in working with Trish on the film, it was wonderful to be able to express what we were feeling at the time and do it in a way that would get across what we were feeling. And she's very good at that, better than anyone else of all the millions of people who've interviewed us. She was the best with the exact right questions and the exact right approach to what was happening. And watching it, I think she captured everything very well. My first inclination after the shooting was to shout to the world, to say, we can't have hate, we can't do this. I didn't have the platform to do that, really. I had a couple platforms, but not a big one. And this one cohesively shows us as regular, ordinary people who got attacked for no good reason. And it was like putting something down in a diary, and it feels like it's done, and it feels like it can carry forward on its own.
Thank you. And Brad, your own reactions to watching the film and revisiting the event.
So the film is phenomenal for the community at large to watch. And Trish said this right at the beginning, and talking about how people watch these horrific events and think it'll never happen here. I think about Tree of Life every single day. I work with the Jewish community for the last 5 years, trying to keep the community as safe and secure as possible. And I think it's really important to have a film like this to really educate people on what happened. And when I see Audrey, I see resiliency. When I see the survivors of Tree of Life, I see resilient people and how they handled that. And I will tell you, I will never forget that day, that week, that month to follow and working with the people in Pittsburgh. I think it's really important that folks understand that it can happen anywhere, anytime. And if we have anything under our control, right? We can't control what outside forces do, and we can't choose the time and place where we're going to be attacked. But what we can do is choose how much we prepare, think about these things, and really just help mitigate that loss of life. And by watching this film and by sending this film out across the country, across the world, I hope people think about that and think about what it took to live through that horrific day and how strong the folks that survived that. We'll never forget the loss of 11 folks in our community. We'll never forget that, never put that aside, but we got to think about why people lived and how we can protect more people. And that's really what I spend all my time doing. So watching that film is like going to work for me every single day right now. But thank you, Trish, and everybody for putting this together.
Thank you, Brad, for all you do. And thank you, Audrey, for your very kind words. I just wanted to echo quickly that I had trauma-informed training on my last film, and I brought that skill set to the project. And it is a particular one, and not one that, there is common sense to trauma-informed care, but there are important tools that were really necessary to do this work. And but they are also remarkably courageous, gracious, and kind to even entertain the idea of participating in such a project. And I just want to really acknowledge and thank everyone who did. Audrey, you've been phenomenal. And Brad, thank you so much for furthering the mission of keeping people safe and educating everyone on what we're trying to achieve here. Thank you.
Yeah. And Wasi, your reactions to watching the film and revisiting the moment.
Yeah. I guess like first and foremost, it's always hard anytime, if it's a documentary or an article or a conversation, even with somebody, there's this familiar feeling, that came up on the day, which is hard to kind of shake, because sometimes, with distance, you start to, you ever forget it happened, but that visceral, like your heart starts, chest feels tight, your heart beats faster. It's like a reminder of like everything, like the community went through. I can't imagine how hard it is that for you, Audrey, and for everybody else that it's felt it more, closely than I did, to kind of do that and relive that. And I think that to understand how hard that is for people to do, should I hope folks appreciate, how important this project is, and how important it is to tell these stories and understand the resilience and the strength of those involved and what we need to learn from it, because it's not easy for folks to kind of put themselves into this. And the other thing it makes you remember, it's hard not to reflect on, years since, is a lot of it's been within this state of a pandemic, and one thing I recall was how important the bonds were that we had, at the time, and how close our communities were and how often we'd see each other. And it's hard to keep up now, like it is just different. And I use this was a reminder for me. It's like, what, like, it's difficult, but we know how important those things are, to stay close in community, to maintain those relationships. And it's motivating to me to be more intentional and creative in how we can kind of sustain those relationships despite the difficulties that are put in front of us, because of how important it is at all times, but especially in these kinds of times of need, when that's all we can really rely on. So it's kind of the first thoughts.
Thank you. And Rabbi Berkun.
I don't know where to begin. I'm just grateful that this film was made. It was very effective, very authentic. I didn't find it sensationalist, but it was emotional. Eric mentioned that he left Pittsburgh. I would challenge the fact that anybody who dwelled in Pittsburgh for a significant amount of time ever really leaves Pittsburgh. It stays with you in a very powerful way. And I know that that it did for me and that it did for my family. And I resonated very much with what Wasi said. We may have actually met at Soldiers and Sailors on Sunday night. And I remember being so touched and so moved by the efforts of the Muslim community there. But yes, there was a little PTSD in watching this for me, even though I wasn't there. And for those of you either watching or on the panel that don't know, I grew up at Tree of Life. Well, we moved to that congregation when I was 10. My father served there actively and in retirement, but really for 35 years, and didn't go that particular Shabbat morning because my mother wasn't feeling well and asked him not to go where he would go every single week, even in retirement, and sit in the back with all of those who are now have been murdered. And in particular, I appreciated the sentimental segment on Cecil and David, the two brothers who I used to run around the synagogue with them. They really took me under their wing when I used to come to shul, and I had nothing but sisters who I wasn't interested in hanging with them. They weren't interested in hanging with me. But Cecil and David, with their developmental challenges, even though they were older than I was, we were soulmates, and we ran around a lot, and they were filled with so much love and joy and humor and kindness. But just to have been back there in those days, it was something I'll carry with me forever. I know my father will, and I thought that the comprehensive nature of the film was very effective. That you really sort of touched on everything without staking a particular point. Without there's been a lot of, for lack of a better word, politics infused in this, as is everything, I guess, in the world today. And I just felt it was beautifully balanced and a powerful presentation, a snapshot of an emotional snapshot of what really took place, so that people could look at it who may not have a concept of what really transpired, but all those images of inside the synagogue, which I still haven't seen. My father hasn't seen. None of us have been back inside. Rabbi Myers actually told my father that he would not allow my father to go inside afterwards, because he never wanted him to see the images of the shul after having been so desecrated and devastated. So it was powerful for me to see the inside of places that I really felt very much at home for such a large part of my life. So thank you.
Thank you. And Josh?
I'll second everybody. I thought the film was incredibly well done, and somebody who was there, and present and responding to the shooting, not only on day one, but on hour one. I say that as probably someone who would have been one of the harshest critics that I thought it told the story in a really beautiful and unique way. I had a really hard time watching the film, and I wasn't prepared for it, because like Brad, I spent, almost 2 years of my life afterwards working on this every single day. And even now in the role that I serve in Miami, it's a very similar role. And so I'm a little bit more distant, but still talking about it every day to people who will listen, to people who are Jewish and not Jewish, who need to understand, the worst types of anti-Semitism. And, that's why I think this documentary is so important, because it shares that in such a powerful way, and so much more powerful than any one person's personal story. And I forget who said it. I think it might have been Trish, who thought, "I can't believe this happened in Pittsburgh." My reaction was the opposite. My reaction was, this happened to have happened to the Jewish community in Pittsburgh on October 27, 2018, and it could have and has happened to almost every diverse community across the United States, and unfortunately will continue to happen, whether we're talking about a Sikh Gurdwara in Oak Creek, Wisconsin, or a Black church in Charleston, South Carolina, or an LGBTQ nightclub in Orlando. Unfortunately, the list goes on and on and on, and there are several other Jewish targets as well. On a different note, something that made me smile during the video was, Wasi, you and I talked, I think, almost every single day for about 2 weeks at least after the shooting, and the Muslim community is raising this money. What do we do with it? How do we distribute it? I had no idea you didn't have the money yet. I think by the time you called me, you had raised, you said we have 60K, which later I think became $250,000, and it might have only been the day after, but I had no idea at any point in time that the money wasn't there yet, and that made me smile.
Yeah, well, I was confident. So I was like, kind of like, either that or my life savings. What are the options?
You're a man of faith, Wasi. You're a man of faith.
There you go. There, the heavens will provide. Just because many of you mentioned the word trauma in different settings, and because we are the Center for the Advancement of Jewish Education, so we obviously want to make sure that whatever we're doing is educational. I wanted to ask if any of you had been through the experience, or actually anybody on this call to some extent on this Zoom, in some ways has been through the experience, whether live and in person or immediately thereafter. Have you ever had EMDR trauma therapy? Any of you?
EMDR means?
EMDR, for those who, I'm glad you're asking, it's an acronym for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And it's a type of therapy for trauma victims that greatly reduces the pain and intensity of the disturbing experiences and the memories. And I've been through it myself, and I can say it's pretty revolutionary because you still remember the experience, but you no longer emotionally relive it again and again with the same level of emotion. It's almost like you know what happened, you can see it right in your mind's eye, you can speak about it. So it's not like your memory is gone, but you don't emotionally click in to the experience of it. And as a result, you're then free from constantly being triggered by the trauma. So I mention it in case there are other people watching, in case you know people who are having difficulty still in dealing with the trauma from the event. EMDR. There are practitioners in every community. Just look up, Google, of course, EMDR trauma therapy. So I just put it out there in case any of our listeners, our watchers, or any of you know people who could benefit from this. So just leave that aside for a moment, but I thought I'd mention it. I wanted, yes, Audrey.
If I may say,
sure. Mm-hmm.
I have learned that people who took action during what was happening had less residual trauma thereafter, and that's apparently a common thing. So if you do take control of the situation and get up and run, hide, fight, and do exactly what Brad taught us beforehand, then you're more likely to come through it more smoothly.
And if I may, Audrey, I think one, that's a great point. And two, we talk about a trauma-informed response when we talk about any critical response to an incident. And I will tell you, speaking with the survivors of Tree of Life, and Audrey, I think we had this conversation probably about a month ago when I asked you how you're doing. And Audrey actually said, I am doing better than most. And so I think it's real important to understand that, because we get across the community, and there are going to be people that view this film and have viewed this film today that are going to say, this terrifies me. I'm afraid. I don't know how I'd react. And I'm here to tell you exactly what Audrey said. The more preparation you have, the more you not embrace something bad happened, but understand that bad things can happen and that you can respond to empower yourself. And I think in our community, in the community that I serve, to empower our folks, our people every day through training, through just talking about this, is going to get them much further ahead than most, because I have had people say, I'm too afraid to go through active shooter training. And if we're talking about Miami, you have an expert down there with Stephanie Villegas, who is the security director down in Miami, who does training. And Josh, I have to say it because I'm looking at you and Wasi. Pittsburgh got a huge loss when Josh Sayles left. The work he did with Wasi beforehand in Tree of Life the integration of that community relations within Pittsburgh was truly outstanding. And I come from a law enforcement world and, almost 3 decades and never really witnessed anything like that in the work Josh did with Wasi. So I know Miami's in good hands with Josh down there. So I had to say that, Josh.
Appreciate the shout out, Brad. I'm not sure I deserve that amount of credit, but I appreciate it. Thanks.
You do.
And actually, I wanted to ask Wasi, in an era when Muslim-Jewish relations are not very strong in many communities, tell us more about what motivated you to decide to financially support the Jewish community with your offer to pay for the funerals, as noted, before you had even raised the money. Like, where was that motivation? And maybe you have some advice that you can give us to help make our relationship in any community. How can we improve our relationships with Muslim brothers and sisters here in Miami and anywhere that we encounter?
I mean, in part, it wasn't. Pittsburgh's a special place, like first and foremost, and I think it was amazing. We built upon decades of relationships between the Muslim and Jewish community for a very long time, where myself and Josh could come in and continue that beautiful legacy. Because there's such a foundation and we had already known each other, there wasn't really a decision to be made when we decided to raise money and respond. It was like when a family member, like if it's kind of like nobody would ask me to respond if my brother was harmed and there's in need in some way, right? It would just be an obvious thing. It's like, oh, what are you doing, right? It's not like a question of would you respond or not. So in the same way, we didn't really think of it as a decision to make. It was kind of like, okay, well, let's go and do whatever we can, because no matter what, it felt like we couldn't do anything at all. The powerlessness of the moment and the inability to really do anything was within our community. We're like, all right, well, we knew that we had similar burial practices, and our timelines were relatively similar and things could move relatively quickly. So we thought, what, that's something that we know, because of our similarities, and let's try to deal with that first, and it's, funeral costs, burial costs, medical costs, things that folks might think may not happen until a little bit later. We knew it was immediate, so we're like, within a day, we wanted to make sure there's enough money for that. And then it grew from there. And that was the urgency. That's why we made the commitments before anything, because we realized how, that's an immediate question we have to ask ourselves in times of, difficult times in folks pass, that isn't the same across every culture, our 2 religious groups, is that it's something that you have to deal with immediately. It's not in a couple weeks. And that's really heavy, and that's really difficult, especially all of us who've dealt with losses of loved ones. So that's something we decided that, we didn't want anybody to worry about or have to think about, and it is such a difficult time, So I think part of it was just, and it, wasn't a choice we made. We had to act. Another piece was we wanted to pick something that we understood through years of working together about the community and try to help in that way. I'm sure there probably could have been 100 better ways we could have, been helpful or, done other things. And, we, did the best we could at the time. And we hope to keep the relationship strong. I think that's something that has kept up in Pittsburgh after the fact. And I love Pittsburgh. I was planning on sticking around for a long time. So I hope to kind of do my part in maintaining those relationships at least.
I want to tell three quick stories about Wasi, because I think leaders lead, but I think, and I do think that the Muslim-Jewish relations in Pittsburgh are stronger than in most cities. And I would also add, they're pretty good in Miami too. But I think Wasi is an exceptional leader, and I will share three stories. One is on the scene. I was standing there with a couple of colleagues, and every newscast from Western Pennsylvania was there. Every politician at every level was there. Several interfaith leaders were trying to get in, and we were just trying to figure out what was going on. And I'm huddling with my CEO and my chief development officer, and I don't even know what we're talking about. We're just on our phones. And I look up, and Wasi's walking through Wasi is on the scene. And I'm to this day, Wasi, and I've told you this before, I'm not sure how you got past the police barricades. But the Islamic Center, I believe, had their board meetings on Saturday morning. The shooting happened during a board meeting because the center wasn't that far away from nothing from Pittsburgh is really far. And I saw him and I saw one of his board members, Betty Cruz, and I said, what are you guys doing here? And they said, we didn't know what to do. We knew we had to show up. So that's one. Two is the following evening at the Soldiers and Sailors vigil, there were probably about 150 faith leaders in that room. And Wasi was one of the leaders who spoke. And what he said is something that I will never forget. And I know that our community will never forget, because dozens and dozens of people have repeated to me how meaningful those words were. Basically, what he said is, in the wake of 9/11, we as Muslims know what it means to not feel safe in America. And we imagine that the Jewish community in Pittsburgh must be feeling something similar. And whatever you guys need to feel safe, we will do. If you don't feel safe in synagogue, the Muslim community will gather and we will surround the synagogue until you feel safe. And it was such a powerful message. And the last piece, which I guess is not as much as about Wasi, but it is about Jewish-Muslim relations, is one of my darkest days, months after the shooting, was the shooting in Christchurch, New Zealand. When I woke up that morning, and I think 49 or 50 Muslim people in a mosque were killed, and I woke up and I read the news that morning. And we reconvened our crisis management team that hadn't met at the Jewish Federation, that hadn't met regularly in a while. And we came into the office early and we just said, what do we do? Guys, what do we do? And we said, we have to pay this forward. Let's open an emergency fundraising box and for the local Jewish community in Pittsburgh, and that's the least we can do, and we'll start there. I remember thinking to myself, oh my gosh, I hope we get $10,000 in this fund, just so that we don't look foolish. I don't know who's going to give. I don't know where it's going to come from. We had $20,000 in 6 hours. And we ended up raising Jewish community for the Muslim community, Jewish community in Pittsburgh for the Muslim community in Christchurch, $660,000. And it wasn't just us locally. It was people from all 50 states, from I want to say like 10 countries. I want to say the GoFundMe page in Christchurch was like taking 7 or 8%. So a lot of people didn't want to go give there. And they looked to the Jewish community in Pittsburgh and said, we're aware of the Jewish and Muslim relationships in the city, and we know that the Jewish community will find a way to take care of us and distribute the funds.
That's just beautiful. So
and,
nice.
And one thing I want to say about what Josh mentioned about the offer I made to Muslim community members would be happy to, if it's getting groceries, if it's anything, walk with our Jewish brothers, sisters, and siblings. If they feel uncomfortable at all. The reason I picked that particular, even the grocery store is specific, as an example, obviously I wanted to convey how much we were there for everybody. But when I started at the Islamic Center of Pittsburgh as executive director, I spoke to a former leader and, about interfaith relations. And that was one of the first things they said to me, is one of the most powerful moments in their life, was that when 9/11 happened and Muslims were being attacked all around the country and being blamed, we had Jewish congregants show up at our Friday prayer, stand in the back quietly, and then make the same offer to our congregation. And week after week, they would come back and be present with us just to show in solidarity. And that always struck with me, and how it was stressed to me by my elders in the Muslim community, who was passing down this torch to be like, this is a crucial relationship, that we understand each other in ways that other communities it's not replicable, right? We need to maintain this. It's so important. And it stuck with me. And actually, I didn't write it down. It just is something that I remembered, at the time, it just became like, what, that's exactly what our community needed to hear then. And I was hoping that's what folks needed to hear now, and to understand that this is something that we never forgot, even though I wasn't there at the time, when that was made, that offer was made to the Muslim community, it's something that we pass down, and talk about. So these the impact, people can have, like the Josh of previous generations, Audrey previous generations, on these relationships, are generational apparently. Because I'm feeling the impacts of of what they shared with me, and in a time when I was still a young child. So
that gives me so much hope, because it means that, like, whatever even small thing that we do right now that seems fairly insignificant in the moment has the possibility of laying the foundation for beautiful things in the future. And that's just a lovely idea. Rabbi Berkun, you had previously wanted to speak.
I didn't want to come between Josh and Wasi as
they're having the bros. Yeah.
But from the vantage point that I had in those early days, first of all, I would just want to say again, while I'm sure there are, and I'm active and very active in Muslim-Jewish relations here in Miami, there's a special sauce in Pittsburgh. And I'm not talking about Heinz ketchup. I'm talking about the connection that everybody has to that community, regardless of the diversity from which they come. There is a sense of loyalty and a sense that we are all part of this, black and gold town. And so I'd like to believe that there's something in the water there that allows the kinds of relationships to grow. But then I also feel that there's different kinds of leaders. There's leaders that sort of, sit down and think about the next steps and calculate what we should do. And then there's the leaders like we have in our tradition of Nachshon, who walks into the water before the Reed Sea splits and Moses and the children of Israel go through. He just walks in. And I was thinking about, Wasi's gesture almost exactly the same way I thought about the police officers who just, ran in, and, some of them were seriously injured, and they just jump right in because they know that their presence is needed. And I think that led to the whole global movement of show up for Shabbat, which was so impactful wherever people were. But the other thing I want to say, and maybe this will lead to another angle of this retrospective, was that I think that the Muslim community gesture really planted a flag on this tragedy, that the Jewish people were not alone in their suffering. And I would like to believe that the entire city of Pittsburgh would have come together in the same way that it did, that the front page of the secular newspaper would have printed Hebrew characters regardless. But there's a part of me that feels that, Wasi and the Muslim community, planted a flag and said, we are not, in a very public, splashy fashion, with, obviously without having the money behind him and no one knew, but just that we cannot let this be a Jewish thing. This is, yes, it was the Jewish thing, but we all need to rally around and show the world that, when any human being, any group is attacked, we all need to rally as citizens of this country and this planet. And I'd like to believe that was a step that just invited everybody else to have that same disposition, which of course, those of us who were in Pittsburgh in those days, those of us who were watching what was happening at Pittsburgh and the ways that synagogues were embraced in a loving way all over the country in that first Shabbat, I think may have been due to some of that very quick and inspiring leadership and that partnership that we witnessed. Just my take.
It's so beautiful. It's amazing. Like this is an opportunity to really go Pittsburgh. It's incredible. It sounds like it makes me want to go live there, go visit. I have to go see what the special sauce is. It's incredible. So I wanted to turn, actually, Audrey, as a survivor of the shooting, it's now been 3 years. How has this changed your life?
I guess I spend a lot more time fighting against hate than I do all of the other things that I was involved with at the time. But that's not a bad thing. I have never stopped. One thing I would like to say, since this is the Jewish Film Festival, it's very difficult to advocate for one's own people. All my life, I've been an advocate for anyone who's oppressed by anything, for gay rights, Black rights, women's rights, whatever. I guess I'm a woman, but it's still different. it's hard to advocate for your own people. And I think that we shouldn't have to. I think it's more important that we all advocate for each other, because the people who are being oppressed are not the people who can change anything. It's the people who are doing the oppressing who have to decide to change. And so it has been very difficult to push forward against anti-Semitism because it's us.
Interesting. Thank you. And Brad, you know, how did this change your life? How did anything? I mean, you're involved in preparing people for these experiences, and then, you know, and then this happened. And how did all of this affect you?
Well, I think how it affected me is understanding really the importance of educating people in our own community. I serve the Jewish community, but I serve the community as a whole. And I'll just pose a question I ask every audience that I ever talk to or I ever train. And I ask the same question all the time. How many people have been subjected to anti-Semitism? How many people have had something spewed at them? Pretty much predominantly every group, everybody raises their hand. The follow-up question to that is, what did you do? Who did you tell? Did you report it to law enforcement? And there's at that point, everybody does not raise their hand. One thing I've seen very early on, and I've been working for the Jewish community now for almost 5 years, year and a half prior to the Tree of Life attack, is that anti-Semitism was almost expected and people tolerated it. I think those days are gone. We can't afford to dismiss anything, any sign of hate. We have to report it. We have to be great partners with law enforcement. Our community is like any community, right? People love the police officers. Some people don't want to have police officers around. We as a community can't afford not to have good relationships with our elected officials, with our law enforcement partners, and to report everything. And so my life hasn't changed. It's just sped up from going 65 miles an hour to 120 miles an hour all the time across the country and in Canada. So I spent a lot of time traveling and working with Jewish communities all across the country. And it's the same pretty much story everywhere. And so that awareness that people, when they watch a film like this, understand how that impacted not just 11 people's lives, but everybody that they touched. And so the importance as we band together and work as a community to really kind of keep everybody safe and sound. So I'm the safe and sound guy. I'm the safe and security guy. And that's what I preach all the time. But it really starts with that individual kind of being aware, reporting, and not being afraid to report. So I think that's probably the most important message I can get out here today.
Beautiful. Thank you. And Rabbi Berkun and Josh, you know, each of you in your different ways, but it's interesting. When I was watching the movie, there was one moment where everybody had gathered after the shooting on the bima and of the synagogue, and you know, people were singing, obviously, and then and as the camera pans, right in the back row was Jonathan, right, Rabbi Berkun.
It wasn't a synagogue. It's Wasi and Josh can explain more. It's
okay. So some other place.
Historic building and Soldiers and Sailors.
That's why everyone keeps mentioning the Soldiers and Sailors. Okay, got it. So I, you know, you're panning and I see you, and your dad was actually there too, but he was behind people, so we couldn't see him. But I saw him like the only person that I actually knew when I was where they were panning was you. So there you were, obviously immediately afterwards. I can imagine that day was pretty horrific. You're getting the report, you're getting on a plane, you're flying to be with your parents. You know, how has the shooting personally affected you? What
I mean, it's changed and defined my life. I never imagined, you know, Tree of Life, which was a wonderful shul that I grew up in, that would be a global household name that come to mean the same type of things that when we say Sandy Hook, or, you know, when we say Poway, or when we say 9/11, you know, a day in September. I mean, it's so that has changed forever. I mean, nobody says Tree of Life with the same feeling that they did before October 27, 2018. My father was profoundly affected with PTSD. My mother, eventually 6 months later, they moved to Miami, which was part of the plan anyway, and she passed 6 months later. So it really changed a tremendous amount. And I was reflecting in real time when I was there at sort of 2 a.m. because I didn't know what else to do and I couldn't sleep. And some of those messages were shared in ways that I found quite surprising. But being there was the only place I knew I could be. A Saturday night, we actually had tickets to see, there was an Israeli Philharmonic downtown, and I hadn't made the decision yet. And I'm sitting listening to Hatikva, and the Consul General was there, and I'm buying a plane ticket, on my phone. And by the time we drove back to Aventura, I already had my flight and knew I was going to be leaving at 6 a.m. the next morning. I will tell you that to get phone calls on my cell phone, we have a lot of Holocaust survivors in our congregation and here in Miami. I think I held it together for much of that day. It was around 9 o'clock at night that my cell phone rang on the drive back from this concert back to my house. And it was a Holocaust survivor in our congregation. And she was sort of calling me to say, yeah, not only, I'm sorry, but it was like, you see now what, and it was rough and it was powerful and it was memorable. I'll never forget that conversation. So, but it was crazy. And then in addition to all the Tree of Life family members that I knew and grew up with, I'll just share this other small side anecdote that, while I'm there and my father is, struggling to sort of keep it together, his phone is ringing off the hook, and I'm trying to take him from interview to interview that we accepted, but most of them we declined. And he keeps telling me that there was another victim who was connected with someone that I had converted in Miami, and all of the names didn't ring a bell to me. I didn't know who he was talking about. And it wasn't until I was at the end of the Rosenthal brothers' funeral and I'm standing on the steps of Beth Shalom, and the rabbi of Beth Shalom, was the one who made that connection. He said, Daniel Stein, son is Joe Stein. His wife is Janina. Janina lived in Miami. She studied for her conversion with you. She really is a Marano. She had a great grandmother, who had memories of being Jewish. And so she returned to her roots as a single girl in Miami, moved to Pittsburgh for a job, met this Jewish boy, got married, and had a baby. And so I had finally put it together and I drove there immediately. My father went to be with another family from Tree of Life. And it was a private funeral, but the rabbi from Beth Shalom knew where it was and told me where to go. And I just walked in, it was already in progress. And I cut through everybody and went straight to Janina and gave her a hug. And she was sobbing. And she said at the grave, my ancestors suffered hundreds of years ago in the Inquisition in Spain. And now look at my son, he's going to grow up without a grandfather. Mm. And so, I don't know how to answer the question other than that, but that's what those days were like for me. And I carry it. So I have a wall in my study here. A woman in our congregation, Rosie Loafer, is an artist. She paints trees, and she painted me this beautiful tree that she called Tree of Life. The oil was still wet. She brought it the day that I got back on Wednesday. And it's up in my office and it looks beautiful. And people look at it and they say, well, what a beautiful piece of art. And then if they spend another 10 seconds, I tell them that that's Tree of Life. It was painted in honor of and in memory of the victims. And then above it is a little Pittsburgh Steelers, shtick, which of course I have to have, but it identifies that wall. But yeah, so sorry for the long question, but it's definitely changed my life and the life of my family forever.
And it actually reminded me of that very poignant scene in the movie where I think it was Anthony Feinberg, whose mother Joyce was murdered and who's married to a French woman. And I believe it sounded like they lived in France. And the mother, of course, was very, very concerned about the anti-Semitism in France and how dangerous it was to be Jewish in France. And you're potentially going to die if you live in France and you should be here in America. And then he's relating that story and it became like, oh my goodness, like the woman who had that concern is the one who's been murdered. So these are very tough. And Josh, how has the shooting, changed you?
So many ways. Look, I can pinpoint the exact moment that it kind of clicked for me, and I can just tell you the first hour after the shooting. The shooting happened a little bit before 10 a.m. And about 10 a.m. I got a phone call from a past JCRC chair in Pittsburgh who I was very close with, who I work with a lot, and it was Shabbat, and I don't work on Shabbat. So when the phone rang and I saw it was him, I thought he had Steelers tickets, and I went, I'll call him back in a few hours. And when he called again, I picked up and he said, there's been a shooting, Tree of Life, turn on the news. And I didn't turn on the news. I called my CEO immediately. And he said, I'm already on the scene. I'm sitting in my car. The shooter is active inside building. Don't come down here. And I hung up. And as soon as I hung up, I got a call from Senator Casey's office. The senator's already in Western Pennsylvania today. There's been a shooting at Tree of Life. We're on our way. What do you know? And I said, at this point, I don't know that much more than you guys do, but I'll keep you posted. And I hung up the phone and I just went, I have to get down the scene. By the time I got dressed, I got in my car, navigated traffic, and was negotiating with police officers for about 10 minutes to try to get inside the barrier. As I was walking through, as they finally let me through, the SWAT team was leaving the building, and they were walking in double file, and they were lined up exactly perfect order, like you would imagine. To this day, I couldn't tell you if there was 8 of them or 20 of them or 40 of them, but there was a moment that clicked, like, excuse my language, but I feel like it's appropriate here. I went, oh shit, that's when it hit me. Moving forward, in the following days and weeks, I think I was 34 at the time, and it was very sobering. And I still think about it, to be 34 and actively doing this work and realizing that at 34, this could be the most important thing I ever do. Brad mentioned he worked in the Jewish community. He was, and he's just gone from going 65 to 120 miles an hour. I mean, there were many, many reasons why I moved on to Miami. It was for the right professional and personal reasons, but I will also say that it was so that, we never go 65 miles an hour in the Jewish community, but it was so that I could go closer to 65 miles an hour than to 120. So.
Thank you. And then I guess for our last remaining brief moments, I wanted to just turn to Eric and Susan and Trish again, the makers of the film, and just ask each of you, what do you want people to learn from this movie, from this film? What do you want their takeaways to be from your own personal perspective, since you were an integral part of creating this for people? So Eric, why don't you begin, and we'll go back around to Susan and Trish at the end.
I just wanted to thank everyone on the panel for sharing their stories. First of all, it means a lot to see the film, provoking these kind of responses. And, that's why you make it in the first place. And I guess what I want people to take away from it is the, that this can happen anywhere and to anybody, and that, we carry around these identities on us and with us, and that some people are provoked by them, and it's not your doing, and to be aware of that, and to hopefully in your life in any kind of way be trying to provoke and change, whether it's reading that you do, or in how you speak to your friends. If somebody's making some kind of off-color comment, that stuff becomes a grain of sand in them, and it can grow, and it can, anybody can be an extremist eventually. And so calling that out when you see it amongst your peers is vital. And hopefully, that's why at the end of the film, when Audrey's talking about kind of, you know, these missions and these stories in the Torah and what they mean to her. You know, we show these kind of scenes of activism that are happening around the country and that have been happening is because, you know, we think that it's important for that kind of change, for change to happen, for people to come together. It's necessary. And so hopefully the film brings that about in some small way, whether, you know, even if it's just saying something to a friend who says something that's wrong.
Thank you. Susan.
Oh, thank you all for your beautiful stories tonight. It's very, very, very moving. I want to just go back to what Rabbi Berkun was saying earlier about the incredible connection and the ties between the Jewish community and the Muslim community in Pittsburgh, and Wasi's, you know, extraordinary move on, you know, in support of the families. And, you know, in this time of great division in our country, to see these two communities come together in this way is so powerful, and it really speaks volumes. And I really want people to see the film and to understand that we can come together to fight hate. And that it's, I think, going back to what Audrey was saying in the film, it's an active thing. You have to act. You can't just hope that it happens. Communities have to come together, people have to come together. And my hope is that the film will inspire people to do what the Jewish and the Muslim community did in Pittsburgh, and to heal and bring us, you know, break down some of these divisions and fight against white supremacy.
Thank you. Trish.
If this experience with this Q&A this evening is any indication of what this film can do, I am beyond motivated and inspired. We, as artisans, we dedicate ourselves to things that matter to us deeply. And everyone involved, Eric and Susan and the rest of our team, did everything we could to show love and care and give voice in a way that would engage and illuminate and inspire people to do better and to treat each other better and to think cautiously and carefully. One of the things that Pittsburgh has, in addition to its special sauce and neighborhoods and community, is we have a lot of bridges, and we build bridges. And what I hope with the film is that we can build bridges beyond belief in ways that we haven't seen before, that we can repair, and we can change hearts and minds in a way that people haven't really considered. You know, one of the things we do is we share a lens into the lives of others. And we hope that that creates a perspective through the visceral experience of the voices in the film that perhaps someone might not have actually taken time to think about. And, you know, to echo Audrey's magnificent and beautiful voice, we have to cause peace to happen. It's an active thing we do, as Susan just mentioned. I am endlessly inspired by all that I've learned through all of their voices. When I hear Anthony Feinberg say, in fact, we would give all the money in the world for another day, my heart stops. And if we can prevent this from happening to someone else, their bravery and courageous efforts to want to bring about change after what they've been through is stunningly heartwarming, because they haven't stopped trying to give back and to have an exchange. So I feel really moved by this conversation tonight. And I think that we will begin again, and we will do more so that this never again happens. And it is about community. It's about reaching across the aisle and to look at ourselves and to think about the subtleties of anti-Semitism and hate in all forms and the overt things we see, and to really hold leadership accountable, to ask for accountability on a corporate level, on whatever level it may be, for all of us as women, as Jews, as Muslims, as Asians. As you know, I was at the doctor's office yesterday morning, and she was talking about how abused she was as a child, chased this chink out of the neighborhood, and sharing with her my work. And she was so thankful that people stepped up during this wave of anti-Asian hate recently after the pandemic, calling it the China virus, how dangerous that has been for the community. So it is endless and everywhere. And I think this is how we start locally, we think globally. And I think we will really make a difference. And I'm hopeful for that. And I feel so inspired by this conversation. And I want to thank you for having the film and the festival. It's an incredible honor. I want to thank you for all the hard work you did in putting this together, you and your team, and to Josh and Rabbi Berkun for participating, and Susan and Eric and Audrey and Brad and Wasi for forever standing together and uniting and wanting to bring about such crucially needed and important change. So I am inspired this evening to continue on the journey of bringing the film to the world and to having its impact resonate strongly.
And I want to thank you for your beautiful words. And in the spirit of that metaphor of the bridges of Pittsburgh that you mentioned as such a central part of that city on the three rivers, I will just quote Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav, whose famous saying, we often quote, Kol haolam kulo gesher tsar ma'od va'ikar lo lefached klal, which I'll translate more freely as the entire world, or one's entire life, could be perceived as a kind of narrow bridge that you're standing on, which is kind of precarious. You can always imagine those swinging bridges we often see the rope bridges, and your job is to cross the bridge throughout your life. And that's kind of scary. It's a narrow bridge, but the most important thing is not to let fear rule your life, not to let the fear on all around you to rule your life, but to be able to be solid on that bridge and do what one needs to do. And clearly in making this movie and in sharing your stories, we've all contributed to strengthening ourselves and strengthening that bridge. So thank you to each one of you for being here, for spending the time, for sharing of yourselves so deeply. And once again, I also want to thank all of our members, our sponsors, community partners, volunteers, and all of the film lovers, as well as the Center for the Advancement of Jewish Education and the Greater Miami Jewish Federation for participating and supporting this milestone 25th Miami Jewish Film Festival. Have a beautiful evening, everyone. And again, I can't thank you enough.
Thank you.
Thank you.